Chapter 9, Management. Managers oversee the work of the employees of an organization. They are higher level positions that typically make more strategic decisions, and it involves management and leadership, which are two different things, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Basically, to manage someone is to handle all of the administrative tasks. You want to make sure that they have the appropriate resources. You want to make sure that they show up to work on time, that they're given tasks, that they complete those tasks. Leadership is a little bit different. Your best managers will be able to do the administrative side of it plus the leadership side. But leaders typically are able to get people to follow them, and they are able to inspire people to do things, make it a better, more satisfactory work environment if you have good quality leadership. In order to be a manager, you have to be able to do a lot of different things and do them well. You have to have strategic and conceptual skills. You have to be interpersonal. You have to be able to talk to people and deal with people on an emotional level sometimes. But you also have to have technical skills. You have to know what is necessary to get the job done. So you don't have to be an expert in a particular field. I've oversaw people doing work that I didn't technically understand completely, but I knew what the job entailed and what was required of it so that I could get the resources in terms of time, money, and equipment, and teaming people up with other people that are necessary to be able to achieve the objective in order to put my staff in a position to succeed. There are various levels of managers. The three managerial levels that typically are applicable are top managers, middle managers, and first line managers. The top managers, these are your CEOs, the CFOs, Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer, COO, Chief Operating Officer, as well as various presidents, vice presidents, managers of divisions, etc. They are largely responsible for establishing the mission of the organization and to put through whatever type of strategy, where we want to be in a year, where we want to be in 5 years, what are we going to do with the revenue that we bring in, whatever profit is coming in, are we going to reinvest it? Are we going to pay bonuses? Are we going to buy more advertising? Are we going to put it back into research and development? They're also going to be making these higher level strategic decisions on the basis of the external environment. If there are any opportunities that are available, they'll be able to put forth the strategy in order to achieve taking advantage of those opportunities. They also develop, as I said, long range plans where we want to be in the future. I'm going to jump down to first line managers. First line managers, basically, they're your supervisors. They oversee the people actually doing the work. I had a manager a few years ago, and he just kind of said jokingly, I don't actually do any work. Now, obviously, being a manager entails a lot of work, but the type of work is what he's referring to. He didn't mean that he was putting together whatever products we were manufacturing. He meant that he needed to have the time to oversee the people doing their work. So managers do work, they just don't do the actual work that's happening. What they need to do is make sure that they hire the right people and put them in the position to be able to achieve what they're assigned to do. Middle managers are basically a liaison between the top managers. They'll take the strategy, they'll take the bigger picture items, and they'll figure out a way to put it into a practical objective that people can actually carry out in the tasks on their job. So the middle managers will pass along all of that to the first line managers. Middle manager, let's say we have a big corporation, the top managers are the division heads, and then each department within a division would have a manager that would oversee maybe a couple of elements. So you would have people in retail, somebody in the clothing department, somebody in the grocery department. The first line managers would be the ones dictating exactly what should be happening within those units, and then they would report it up to the middle managers who have oversight of all of the people below them. Managerial skills, there is a slide here. They talk about Robert Katz. There's a lot of people that have done a lot of research that are the basis for the text. What they talked about earlier was technical skills. You need to have some ability. Again, you don't need to necessarily be an expert. I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates aren't writing code for the applications that are going on through Facebook and Microsoft, but they understand very well the nature of the work. So that allows them to have enough technical skill to make decisions that are going to be practical and achievable. The frontline managers have to use technical skills on a daily basis, and they probably are a little bit more adept at the actual work. Higher level managers, the technical skills they need to have, no one person could ever know how to do everything. If you're the CEO of Ford, You're not going to know how to put in a carburetor or a fuel injection. You're not going to know how to balance tires, but you do have an understanding of what is necessary for those tasks to happen. The frontline managers, contrary to that, would have a lot more specific knowledge in their particular area. They won't know how the rest of the industry or the rest of the organization is taking care of their jobs, but they are have their own technical skills, and it is more focused on the specific things that they're trying to accomplish. Managers also need to have conceptual skills. They need to be creative, come up with ideas about identifying opportunities, diagnosing problems, figuring out ways to take advantage of those opportunities and to resolve the problems in the most effective and efficient manner. You also have to have interpersonal human skills. Work entails working with other people generally, and you have to be able to talk to people. You have to be able to treat them with authority, but also with respect and empathy, depending on the situation. You probably have all had jobs at some point, and you've probably had a boss that you couldn't stand. Very likely it's because they didn't have particularly good interpersonal skills. They're commanding, they're demanding, they don't really have an ability to talk to people. And there's always a fine line that managers have to deal with between being friends with all the people that they work with and being their boss. It's an interesting combination. You can be friendly with your people, but at the same time, you are accountable to make sure that they do their work, and you have the authority to fire them if they don't, or if they behave in a manner that is not acceptable within the organization. So sometimes if you're best buddies with your staff, that can be problematic. Sometimes if you treat them as if they were simply peons that are required to do everything that you tell them to without paying any attention to their human needs, that's going to be a problem too. So it's kind of a balancing act. It's basically the Goldilocks rule. You're trying to do what's just right, not anything on one extreme or the other, but you need to be able to function in a manner that people will respect you and also feel that they're heard and they can talk to you if there's an issue that comes up. The next slide has an example of what the different management levels involve. So typically, I probably should have used a different slide that I have that I like a little bit better, but top management, it's very important for conceptual skills and human skills, not so much the technical skills. As I said, you can't know every single thing that the organization is doing, but they spend most of their time doing the higher level strategy that applies to the entire organization. Middle managers, because they're the liaisons between the top and the supervisor management, they have to have really good human skills. The conceptual skills, maybe not so much. The technical skills, because they're not doing the actual work, as I mentioned before, maybe not so much, but they have to be able to communicate very well and they have to be able to deal with people in order to convey the messages from top management and make sure the job is getting done. At the lower level, at the supervisory level of management, the technical skills and the human skills are the most important because they're the ones actually overseeing the tasks that are being done on a daily basis. The conceptual skills, it's always a good idea to have them. And in fact, if you want to get promoted, demonstrating those types of skills are going to be important. But that's typically left to the higher level managers. The next slide basically states what I've already said, but it does add that in a global marketplace, you should have some idea about how to deal with global management issues. If you're in a pizza place in Boston, it's probably not a big deal. But if you are in a multinational company or a company that does international trade, you are going to have to know what types of things are going on. You may have offices located around the world, and different cultures and different management styles will abound everywhere. So you have to be aware of those things as well, so that you can interact with different divisions within the organization from other places. No, throughout most of human history, people kind of worked on their own. It was only after we ended up with the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, the 19th century, that we started working together in larger and larger groups. And as that developed, people started looking at how these groups should be working together and how to make them more efficient and effective. Frederick Taylor is very famous. If you take any other business classes, organizational development, etc., human resources management too, most likely, he tried to apply the scientific method into management. So I put in a definition of what science is: the pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding by following rigorous and systematic methodology based on evidence. So you do research, you conduct experiments, you assess the outcomes, and you try to figure out causation. If something worked, what made it work? If something didn't work, what was the problem? It's only through figuring out what the cause of the successes and the failures are that you can address them. If something is successful, you want to continue to emulate that and apply it because you want to keep being successful. If something is problematic and it's not a success, you want to find out what's causing those problems so that you can correct them. So Taylor looked at the workflows, the things that were being done, how many tasks were being done, how long it took to do it, how much time and money were spent in order to accomplish them. He's basically attributed to the first person to really look at science and management, scientific management. It's also looked at the classical perspective because he was doing this about 100 years ago. And it still is observed to be influential today, but it's not really the gold standard any longer. He basically set the table for everything that followed. It's really the first modern form of management principles that were applied. His four principles that he came up with is to look at each job or each task that is being done within each job to figure out what the best way of performing that job would be. Prior to that, people were just told to figure it out and do the best that they could. This is really trying to standardize processes. So if one person is doing it and they're very efficient and another person's doing it and they're not so efficient, you want to emulate the one that's performing at a high level and train other people to do it that way, because that's going to be the way that provides the best income potential for the company. You also need to hire the right people. If you hire people without the right skill set or the right mentality, they're not going to be able to do the job. That doesn't mean that they're able to come in fully formed. You still should be able to train them up when they get on the job, but they have to be assessed for the potential to understand, and they may need to have certain levels of education in order to pull it off. You also want to look at worker performance and make sure that you provide instruction and training when needed. You have to evaluate the control function of management, which is what we'll talk about in a bit. You want to make sure that the tasks are assigned correctly, that they're given the resources and the time to do it. And you have to look at the performance management to figure out how well they're performing and assess that performance. It's also important to divide management and labor so that management can really do what my old boss talked about, not doing the actual work, the putting things together, but the work behind the scenes to ensure that all the resources are there available so that people can be successful. Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, these were other people that were involved in the scientific insights for management. They actually filmed people. It was probably pretty cutting edge at the time, using essentially video today, but they would have had it on real film to figure out how people performed so that they could compare and contrast. They were a little bit different from Taylor because Taylor looked at reducing the process time, which again, time is money. The quicker you can put something together while maintaining quality, the more money you will likely make because you'll be more productive. They wanted to look at the overall process, making it more efficient by reducing the number of motions involved, basically becoming more efficient in all of the physical activities that were happening. And they really were more concerned with the workers themselves because they figured they would perform better if they were capable of having a high level of satisfaction and felt secure and safe at the job. Henri Fayol was another famous person in management, the science of management. He was a mining engineer, and he had a situation where a horse at the mine broke his leg, and they had to shut the mine down because nobody knew how to go out and do it, how to buy a new horse, how to replace the equipment. The fact that nobody had the authority meant that that was a failure of management. He really tried to take a look at what types of things should be established in management so that this type of situation wouldn't happen again. He came up with 5 duties of management. The first one is foresight. For means forward. That's where the word forward comes from. Sight means to see. So you're looking into the future. What types of things might we have to address going forward? What types of things in the economy? What type of technological changes? What type of economic activity in the industry that we're in? What about our own company? Are we going to be expanding, etc.? So you need to be able to look into the future in order to plan for certain inevitabilities that may come, or even be prepared for the unexpected. It's very difficult to plan for something if you don't know what's going to happen, but if you can plan in a way that you are flexible, then you'd be able to adapt as things arise. He also looks at the organization to make sure that the organization is established in a way that makes sense, that it works together effectively. And you want to make sure that you have the resources necessary to put whatever plans you have in place. You want to have enough money, you need to have enough people, you need to have the buildings, the materials, etc. There's a lot of companies that fail because they're in the middle of manufacturing and your staff is all ready to build things, and you don't have any of the raw materials because there was a failure in management to secure enough of the materials for your staff to put them together. Command is when you hire the people and you give them clear instructions to let them know what is expected of them. The coordination means that you have to be able to balance everything, and it's a little bit of a juggling act to make sure that the workers can do everything in a seamless unit. If you're putting a piece of a product together and some people do one part of it and the other people do the other, they have to understand how they fit into the bigger picture, because if they just go off on their own, there will be delays because one side hasn't done something on what's known as a critical path. You can't build a car if you don't have the chassis first. If I have an engine and nothing to put it in, then that's a problem, and it's a problem of coordination. Control is kind of related to command. You tell people what to do, and then the control is to make sure that they did it and that they did it properly. If they did it properly, you should reward them, you should let them know, and you should reinforce it. If they didn't, you need to make corrections when it's necessary. Fayol came up with a bunch of principles. We're not going to go through all 14 of them, but some of the bigger ones that he came up with that are still in application today are the scalar chain. Scalar refers to something of a quantity based in size. How much of something are we dealing with? And he's really looking at the chain of command. That's basically creating an organizational chart so that people know who relates to whom, who reports to whom, whose boss is whom. We talked about top managers, middle managers, and supervisor managers or line managers. How do they know who reports to whom? Almost every bigger organization will have an organizational chart to be able to answer those questions. You should have unity of command where you only have one superior. I believe I put a clip into Moodle from the movie Office Space where one of the employees was complaining about having 8 different bosses. I have a couple of dotted lines on my organizational chart, so I actually have to report to 2 or 3 different people, but I have one main boss. When you have different people telling you to do different things at different times with deadlines that may conflict, you're left with employees that don't know what they need to do and what takes priority. When you have one person telling you what to do, hopefully they're doing their job correctly and there will be no ambiguity in what your role is, what you're supposed to be accomplishing. There should be unity of direction. One person should be responsible for doing the similar activities rather than trying to be a jack of all trades and stick your fingers into a lot of different pies. You need to be able to know what your job is and to be able to take care of it. And then the division of work refers to specialization. We talked about this a little bit earlier. If you can break down a task into its simplest component parts, it's easier to hire people and get them trained up to do the job quickly. It can also result in boredom because it's going to be very repetitive, but people have to be able to figure out what their jobs are, and the easiest way to do that is to break it apart into smaller components. You can add to that as they progress. You need to learn how to walk before you can run. Key functions of management today: planning, organizing, staffing, leading/directing, controlling and monitoring, and motivating. For planning, that's a process where you have to think about what we're going to be doing. You come up with contingencies in case something goes wrong. You have an option B to be able to pursue. A lot of successful businesses spend a good deal of time planning, because if you're building a house and you don't have any blueprints, it's going to be a mess. If you know that you have to pour the foundation first, get the plumbing done, get the electric done, do the sheetrock painting, all of that comes in a particular order. You need to have that planned out. If you try to make it up as you go, it can become very confusing and you end up having a lot of conflicting problems, which could take a lot more time to correct than it would be if you spent the time to actually do the plan in the first place. If you don't have good, solid, strategic, operational, and contingency plans, you're going to have a hard time achieving your objectives. Most companies do have vision and mission statements. The vision is kind of a higher level vision of what we're trying to do. If you go to any company, any major corporation, if you just Google Walmart, Target, Microsoft, Apple, Coca-Cola, whoever, you will be able to find very quickly their vision and mission statements. Some of them have value statements about what's important to the company. But the mission is really, why does the company exist? What are you here to do? What are you here to perform? Coca-Cola's mission statement is to, quote, refresh the world, inspire moments of optimism and happiness, and to create value and make a difference. Refreshing the world may be kind of an obscure way to say that they're making colored water with sugar in it, but that's what they're really getting at. It's to refresh the world it's implied that it's by making refreshments. Microsoft's mission statement is to empower every individual and every organization on the earth to accomplish more. Again, kind of like Coca-Cola, that seems to be a little bit ambiguous, but what they're really talking about is they're making software and in some cases hardware and other applications to be able to allow people to do more by using their products. They don't exactly say what their products are, but that also would be potentially limiting to them if they did, because they have a vision towards the future. They can't really define what they're going to be doing 5 years from now, but the mission is going to be consistent, whether it's today with what they're doing now or things that they may expand to into the future. McDonald's mission is to make delicious feel-good moments easy for everyone. I guess they're talking about food. Whether you like the mission statements or not, these companies really have that as a starting point. So until you actually define what your mission is, you could be a little bit more specific. If you're a hardware store, you want to be able to provide tools and materials to people so that they can do what they want to do home improvement, etc. However, until you know what the mission is, you can't really start planning to be able to fulfill that mission. Part of the planning is to create a business plan, and there's different types. So a strategic plan, it's more of a long-term goal. Where are we going to be in 5 years? And some of the shorter term things that need to be accomplished to make the longer term plans successful. Tactical plans, these are high-level strategic plans, and they translate them into more specific plans or actions that you need to be doing at every level of the organization. Operational plans talk about the standards that guide implementation of the tactical plans, and then the contingency plans are the things that you do in order to plan for things that you weren't expecting. I remember when September 11th happened, if you look at some of the footage, one of the things that you see after the Twin Towers were hit was massive amounts of paper flying through the air. There were a lot of businesses on top of all of the thousands of people that were killed that day, but a lot of the businesses were wiped out. And there was a company called Cantor Fitzgerald, which was located on the 105th floor of the World Trade Center, and their office was obliterated as well as about half of their staff. 2 weeks later, however, they were running a business out of an office in New Jersey. You could look over the river and see Manhattan and still smoking where the Twin Towers had been. But the company was operational because they had a contingency plan if something like that happened. They had all of their materials were backed up on a server that was off-site. Back in those days, there was really no cloud. You just had to manually submit all of your files to an off-site server every day so that if the main office was destroyed or there was some type of a flood or a fire or something, you'd still be able to access all of that information. They had a way to hire people. They had contacts so that they could continue to do business, and they were able to salvage what they could out of that tragedy that occurred that day. A SWOT analysis is a typical thing. You probably already heard of it. It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What you do is it basically is a way for you to do a self-assessment of the organization. What do you do well? What do you do not so well? What you do well, you want to be able to take advantage of. What you don't do well, you either want to try to avoid or mitigate or correct and make it more of a strength going forward. You can look at the opportunities that are available to you so you can take advantage of them, but you also have to look at threats. The threats could be competition, it could be changes in the economy, it could be the potential obsolescence of the materials and the products that you're making. When you do a SWOT analysis, it just gives you the opportunity to help you when you plan because you understand what your capabilities are. This slide just takes a look at a graphical illustration of what a SWOT analysis looks like. You're going to look at external factors as well as internal factors as well. Typically, the external factors are the opportunities and threats. The internal factors are the strengths and weaknesses. Organizing comes when you take a look at your plan and you have to put them into motion. So you're going to have to figure out who's going to be doing whatever tasks are created by the plan. You're going to have to group the tasks into the departments. Whatever that organizational chart that you're talking about, you have to figure out how you're going to design the company. Are you going to group people by task? Are you going to group people by the function? Are you going to group them by the geography where they're located? Are you going to group them by the customers that they serve, either general consumers or business consumers or other corporate consumers? Are you going to group people by the products that they build? So you could have within Samsung, you could have a cell phone division, you could have a washing machine division or a television division. Most places do it by function, You could have an accounting department, a marketing department, etc. But you have to figure out how to group all of those people together and have it make sense. And then delegate the authority. So you've got the top managers delegating authority to the middle managers, to the superiors of the line tasks, where all the regular employees will be able to have the authority to do whatever is passed along to them. You also need to be able to allocate resources as needed across the organization. Materials, time, money is usually what we're talking about, as well as people. We talked a little bit about specialization and organizing. You need to really go through these tasks. So I've kind of already talked over the slide previously. How you divide the work based on the specialty of the employees that you have, that's something that needs to happen when you're going through the planning phase. The benefits of doing organization is that you can really coordinate everything and make sure everything is working together in harmony. Everything that everybody's doing should be towards the objectives of the firm, which all should be done towards the goals, which are all in furtherance of the overall mission. If you have people that are doing things that do not fulfill any of that along the chain, then they're probably doing things that are not going to be beneficial to the company. It's very important to understand who the chain of command is. So if an employee has a question, who do they go to get that question answered and the situation resolved? Organizational charts and span of control. In a couple of slides, we're going to show what an organizational chart looks like. So I'll give you an example there. But the organizational chart, it usually is a grid where you have, the CEO or the sole proprietor or the partners or whoever owns the company at the top, all the people that report to them, known as direct reports, and then that can be broken down. So I could have the accounting department reporting to me, and then within the accounting department, we could have internal audit, taxation, revenue. So with each of those departments, you would have the accountants that are doing each particular task, and you would follow that chain of command. If an accountant in the audit division has a question, they go to the internal audit manager, who goes to the accounting manager, who would then go to the finance manager. So you would basically develop the chain of command so that everybody knows who is responsible for what duty. Tall organizations are ones that have many, many layers in the organizational chart. It depends on whether or not the organization is suitable for a tall structure. Many business professors and others argue that flatter organizations are more efficient because you have fewer layers that you have to go through in order to get something accomplished. So if I'm a line worker, I go to my boss to say, can I do this? That boss has to go to the manager, who has to go to a middle manager, and maybe that even has to go to top management. And that has to come all the way back down the chain before I can figure out if I can do what I want to do. If you make a flatter organization where I only have a manager and another boss, it's a much quicker turnaround time and it's more efficient. However, certain places you have to have some separation, you have to have these layers. It's really up to the organization to decide what's most efficient for what they're trying to accomplish. Creative places, places that are developing software, you want to have quick decisions that are made, you want people to be creative. They typically are a lot flatter. Places like the military, for example, they have literal ranks. You have privates and corporals and sergeants, lieutenants, captains, majors, colonels, etc. So they have a very tall organizational chart, but it's suitable for what they're trying to accomplish. What the span of control is when we get to the organizational chart, if you have a manager and you've got 5 people reporting to that manager, the span, which refers to distance, if you look at the organizational chart, you'll have parentheses around 5 people. The span of control is 5 people. If you have a flatter organization, that means you're getting rid of other layers of middle management. And typically in a flatter organization, you have a wider span of control. So instead of having 5 people report to me, I might have 10. You may be more efficient if you're a flatter organization, but that puts a lot more stress on your managers, and they have to be very good at their jobs because managing 10 people is exponentially more difficult than managing 3, 4, or 5. Divisional structure I referred to a little bit earlier. You can build your company on the basis of product departmentalization. So it could be, like I said, in Samsung, it could be the product or service that you're providing. It could be geographical departmentation. So you could have a North American division, you could have a Europe division, you could have a New England within the United States or Texas or whatever. So you could group your company that way, or you could go by functional departmentalization, which a lot of people are familiar with. So accountants work for the accounting department, research and development All of your researchers work for R&D. Here's an example from the government. It's the Department of Energy, and you can see the Office of the Secretary. That's basically the boss. And they've got a dotted line over here with the Federal Regulatory Commission. So even though the Department of Energy is its own thing, they have to report to the FERC, FERC. Underneath the Secretary, you've got the Office of the Undersecretary for Nuclear Security. Then you have the Office of the Undersecretary. Then you have another Office of the Secretary of Science. Under the nuclear security, you've got all these other bodies, and each one of those would break out into their own chart where you'd have other managers reporting to other managers. The span of control for the secretary here is relatively limited. Even though you have oversight of the entire organization, you've got about 5 or 6 direct reports. So the span of control on this chart, it looks like it's about 4 or 5. You've got the chief of staff over there that kind of advises the secretary, but they have some authority over everybody else as well. Now, if this was a flatter organization, you'd have to get rid of some of these things in the middle, and it would be a lot wider. So you have a wider span of control. You might have 5, 10, 15 people reporting to the secretary if you eliminated some of these chains in the middle. We've already talked about the functional structure, so I'm not going to go too much into it here, but please read through the chart or the slide. Functional structure diagram, here's an example of it. So you've got the CEO, human resources, what do? They hire people, they train people, they fire people, they manage benefits and salaries. So by function, they're all grouped together. All the people responsible for that are in the same place. Financing and accounting, sales and marketing, research and development, and operations. These are basically defining what employees work where based on the function that they perform. Now, if this were a product structure, then it wouldn't be human resources. It would be cell phones, or it would be laptop computers, or it would be computer applications. You may have a mix of different people by function working on each product. So in the cell phone division, you would have research and development, but you'd also have finance and accounting telling research and development how much money they have to make this particular product. So there's no one best way to do this. It really is a matter of a strategic decision that needs to be made by senior management so that they can come up with the best way to perform their mission. Some bigger companies use a matrix structure, which is a way to have some communications between different departments and a better structure. Not only do you have vertical and horizontal, you kind of have diagonal connections too. It can be very complicated to do a matrix structure, and you have to almost have a manager in charge of managing the matrix structure. If you have good managers and you have abilities to perform it, and you have the kind of company that does a lot of different things that need to have integration, then a matrix structure is probably the best way to go. It can increase costs and it can lead to conflicting employee loyalties because when you see what the chart looks like, we talked about not having 8 different bosses. You could have that type of a structure in a matrix. If you have ambiguous authority, then you could have problems with decision making and conflict resolution because you could have 2 different bosses telling one employee to do 2 different things at the same time. That can be problematic. So that's why it's more complex. The next slide here shows what the matrix structure looks like. So you've got the North American division, you've got one CEO, another CEO doing whatever business units, and you can see that it's basically a matrix. So North America under SBU1 could go down to South America under SB1 and then go over to SB2. That way, all of these different divisions, when they need to, they can work together and talk together. Again, it makes it a much more complicated way of doing it. But again, it is something that can work if it suits the needs of the organization. At the very beginning, I mentioned the difference between leadership and management. All managers need to have some type of leadership role, and there are different ways to go about doing so. We'll focus on management first. There are a lot of different management styles, or at least 3 big ones: autocratic, authoritarian, laissez-faire or free rein, participative or democratic. An autocratic or authoritarian manager is basically the boss. They make the decisions, the employees do what they say. They don't really listen to suggestions, they don't really listen to subordinate input. They make their decisions on their own. The benefits are that it's very quick and effective to get those decisions made because you don't have a bunch of people trying to come to an agreement. It's useful in crisis situations when you need to have quick, decisive decisions made. And it's pretty much well suited for low skill environments where the workers don't need to really be thinking on their feet about how to go about the strategy of doing it. If you're making the fries at McDonald's, you're making the fries at McDonald's, and your boss tells you to make more fries, you make more fries. There are pros and cons to this. It's not necessarily the best for certain organizations, but it may be a very good fit for others. Again, it depends on what type of structure you feel is best suited for you to achieve your mission. Laissez-faire, which is the French term that Adam Smith used to describe the free market, it's basically free reign. So it's hands-off management. You really delegate the task to the employees with little or no direction. This is potentially a problem for lack of productivity, especially if you don't hire employees who are skilled. You may not have a lot of cohesion, and it could result in some dissatisfaction, especially if you're in the type of an organization like McDonald's where you have these lower skilled workers. If you just say, hey, go make whatever food you feel like making, that could be problematic in serving the customers. So it may not be a good fit for some organizations, but if you are a video game manufacturer and you need to come up with new creative ideas, you don't want a boss telling somebody what to do exactly. I want to hire somebody who's really inventive and creative, and I want them to go off and come up with some great new ideas. That's probably more suited for this laissez-faire free reign management style. So it's effective when people can work effectively, they're self-motivated, and you hire those people. And it allows you to let them be as creative as possible so you can get these good ideas. The manager really only comes in when it comes time to decide which ideas are the best ones to employ. Participative and democratic is kind of somewhere in between. The autocrat is a dictator. The free reign just kind of lets you go off and do what you want. This one is where the manager will actually share decision-making authority and get input from group members. You can be, if you're an employee, you can feel more invested in decisions. You're more empowered to have a say in what's going on. This can typically lead to a higher level of satisfaction from employees because instead of just doing what someone tells you to do, if it's not that effective and you have a solution for that, and people listen to you and they implement it and they give you credit for it, then it's more interesting on the job. Again, if it's an emergency situation where you need to make a quick decision in the next 10 minutes, you can't really convene a group of 10 or 15 people to vote and come up with what they think might be the best decision. So there are positives and negatives to each one of these managerial styles. It's really up to the company to decide what type of managers you want to hire and what type of strategies you want them to employ. For leadership, we're looking at transformational, transactional, and narcissistic. Transformational leaders are the ones that are really necessary if you have a lot of change that's taking place. If you have a merger or an acquisition, if you have a redesign of the company because there's a lot of problems, you're going to be doing layoffs, you're introducing a new brand, or you're changing the way the company operates, you need to have someone that's capable of coming up with these ideas and convincing people that this is the way to go and getting the people to follow. So it can enhance motivation, morale, and job performance. Transactional leaders are really focused on supervision, organization, and performance. A transaction is, let's say you go to a store and you purchase something. I pay money and I get something that I want. Transactional leadership is kind of focused on that too. I'm paying you money to do a job. I want you to do the job. It's probably not that unusual for an autocratic manager to be also kind of transactional in their leadership. They basically are focused on reward and punishment. So if you perform well, I'll give you a bonus. If you don't perform well, you either won't get the bonus or you may face repercussions as well. The narcissistic leader is someone who has an excessive interest or admiration of oneself. Narcissism is not really viewed as a positive characteristic. In fact, there is a psychological disorder known as narcissistic personality disorder, when you have someone that is self-centered, arrogant, lacking empathy and consideration of other people, and they strive for glamour. They want to pat themselves on the back and take credit for everybody else's work. There can be some advantages to that because they can be visionary and charismatic. They can attract and inspire followers. But at the same time, it kind of depends on what the company's mission is. If it's not the culture of the company to focus on this self-aggrandizing, then that's not the type of leader that you probably want to hire. They do result in a lot of internal competition and changing alliances. If you have a bunch of managers who are all narcissists, they're all going to want to take credit for everything that's going on. they're going to want all of the resources, and it can lead to a lot of infighting. They tend to listen to only information that supports their view. They don't really pay attention to reality sometimes. And because of their sense of self-worth and their need for affirmation, they can basically only hire people that will agree with them. That can be very problematic in a company because if there is a problem, if you're driving off a cliff and everybody's saying, yes, boss, this is great, instead of saying, maybe you should hit the brakes and turn around, that could be very problematic as well. Just like any place, a city, a state, a nation, a religion, a group of people, a family, companies have cultures as well. And a corporation or a business of any type of structure will have its own type of culture based on really the model that is put forth by the leaders, the initial founders of the company. So it's a set of attitudes, values, and standards of behavior that distinguishes one organization from another. It's kind of an intangible. It's not something that you can touch or feel, but it does have an impact on the way employees act. Because if you are in a company with a culture that does not mesh with your personal beliefs, it's going to be very difficult for you to have satisfaction at that job. So you want to do some research before you take a job. You want to look at what's going on. I believe I also put a movie clip from The Wolf of Wall Street on Moodle, and if you worked for that company, which was basically lying, cheating, and stealing to try and make as much money as possible, the character of Leonardo DiCaprio ends up in prison at the end of the movie. So that might not be a good corporate culture. As a manager, if you have a strong corporate culture, it makes your job easier. If you have a culture where people are accountable, where people treat each other well, they are interpersonal, they have empathy, and they are professional, then you're not going to have a lot of problems. When you have a bad corporate culture, managers have to work harder because you're going to have conflict that you have to resolve, shortages that you have to take care of. It becomes more of a problem. So if you can nurture a good corporate culture, it makes management and operations run a lot more efficiently. Controlling in this context of management is after you've given the tasks to people, you want to make sure that they're completing them in a correct manner. You want to measure performance and do a review of your employees so that you can give them raises or give them additional training if they need it, or take action up to and including termination potentially if they're not able to perform up to par. The rules for controlling vary from upper to mid to line managers. Line managers deal with the day-to-day actions of workers. They have a much more hands-on version of controlling. Mid managers, they're going to be looking over the people that are their direct reports within their span of control. And they'll basically build from the bottom up. They'll get all the data from the people and how they're performing, and then their unit will be telling the upper levels how they're performing on that basis. Upper level managers, if you're in a corporation, you may have to report to the stockholders. How much money did we make? You're not necessarily going to be looking at the day to day, but it's going to be the long picture successes that you can measure. The control process really involves setting standards and goals first, measuring performance against those standards and goals, and then when you have problems, you need to take corrective action. When you don't have a problem, you should be rewarding people and acknowledging them for the successes that they're having. That's sometimes overlooked and it's important. The next thing you want to do is look at the information that you've got from the control process to figure out how to do future performance standards. You may measure the wrong things. We had a situation where we had a call center and people would call in and ask for how to take care of their taxes. And the things that they measured for success was how many calls people took every day. Usually they did that because it's easy. The computer system that we had with our phones could tell you right off the push of a button how many calls somebody took. The problem is when you create that as a metric for success, people will try to answer as many phone calls as they can, regardless of whether they actually provide the information that they're required to. So if I call for tax information and the person answers the phone and says, I don't know, and they hang up and then they answer another call, that's good for them because they've answered a bunch of calls, but it's bad for me. In fact, I may end up calling back again and getting a different person that actually answers my question and takes the time. They're not being measured on actually succeeding and giving me the information that I want. So you're measuring the wrong thing. And that's what we told the staff, that we told the managers there. You need to figure out a better way of doing it. You need to listen in on the calls as well and find out if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. You can't just look at the raw numbers of how many calls that they've answered. The next slide just has a control process figure, so you can take a look at how they are all connected together. Why is controlling important? You can't tell if you're doing the work that you're doing if you're not aware of what the performance is. There's an old saying in management, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. You look at the plans, the organization, and the leadership. All of the plans in the world aren't going to really matter if you have people that aren't performing what the plans have assigned to them. Setting standards and objectives are important. The standards that you create at the higher level, it guides all of the decision making that's going. You can state it in monetary terms. Are your standards and objectives successful? Well, that's based on how much your costs are and how much profits you're realizing at the end of the day. There's a lot of other things that go into that, and a lot of variables that go into it. But at the end of the day, that's really what you're focusing on. When you set these standards and objectives, they use what are known as SMART operational objectives. SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time constrained. You want to have specific goals so that people can understand exactly what they want to do. You want to have some way of measuring it. If you're a salesperson, we want you to sell X number of items in a given day, and then we can measure your performance against the expectations. They should be achievable. If I tell you to sell 1,000 a day, you're probably not going to be able to do it. So it's not realistic either. So achievable and realistic kind of go into the same bucket. They should also be time constrained because everything that we're doing is going to be some levels of time constraints. If you have to get something done, it has to be done within a period of time or it's not going to be profitable. Performance measurement is when you take all of the data that you get from your metrics and figure out how to go about assessing performance. So you want to describe the target objective, evaluate the measurements, make sure you're measuring the right things, as we mentioned earlier, identify the correct metric for each objective, select the targets and determine how the data will be interpreted, and then figure out how to document the performance and use that information to improve as you go forward. This is also a recursive process. So when you get to the evaluation side, if you're not getting good data, if you're not getting good performance, you need to go back down the chain and kind of redo everything to make sure that you're measuring the proper things and that the objectives are meeting the SMART requirements. Some companies use what's known as a balanced scorecard. This is a way of weighting some of the things that you're doing. All things are not equal. We had a situation where I worked for a regulator that told the phone company whether or not they were performing at a good enough level because they were a regulated monopoly back in the old days before cell phones. The phone company needed to achieve certain objectives. They needed to repair your phone if it was out within 24 hours. When we had information, when you would dial 411, they had to answer the phone call within 20 seconds or so. What they did is they installed a computer or an automated system that would answer the phone call and then put you on hold. So you weren't getting the information that you wanted, but we did get the achievement of the metric because we said you had to answer the call. So they did with an automated system, and then they put people on hold. They never met the achievement of fixing someone's phone within 24 hours because they were weighted the same. We couldn't do anything about it. So what we should have done is made that more important. If you don't have a phone, you can't call 411 in the first place. So that should have been a heavier weight. Usually the balanced scorecard is broken up into 4 categories: financial, customer, innovation, and internal processes, and they should all revolve around the internal strategy. The financial bit means that you should be focusing on how do we look to the shareholders? What kind of money are we making? What is their return on investment? From the customer, how are the customers getting their services or their goods? Are they good quality? Are they getting them in a timely fashion? Are they providing value? The internal processes, how are we doing? This is basically through your SWOT analysis. Learning and growth also has what do we need to do to be able to improve and create value? What did we do last time and what can we learn from it? What kind of training, what type of new technologies might be able to be implemented so that we could excel and continue to grow? Here's that figure one more time. You can see in the financial, you've got the objectives, measurements, and KPIs. KPIs are key performance indicators. So those are the things that you're identifying that need to be measured. And then once you figure out what those are, you come up with the targets and whatever new initiatives you could have. So whether it's in financial, internal, innovation, or customer, you're basically following the same processes. Eventually, when you find that there is a problem, you need to take corrective action. So if you have non-performance or underperformance, you have to take corrective action. It could be remedial, putting people back in training. If there's a big problem where people are showing up late to work, maybe you dock their pay. Typically, from a human resources management context, you would want to have progressive discipline. That means you don't start by firing somebody. If it's a relatively minor issue, you should take action that is appropriate for the infraction that took place. So if somebody comes in late, remind them, hey, you came in a few minutes late, please try to come on time. If they come in late every day for 2 weeks, then maybe you say, hey, I'm going to give you an informal warning, then maybe a formal warning, then maybe we dock your pay. And if it's a big problem because they never come on time, then we maybe threaten to fire them. I had a situation where one person at work punched another person in the face and knocked them out. There's no corrective action for that. There's no progressive discipline for that. He was fired on the spot. We put his stuff in a box and had security take him outside. It depends on the context and the situation, what type of corrective action you should take. You should have a process in place. You should be able to follow that process. And what that does is it allows you to be consistent. So if employee A does something and employee B does something, the corrective action should be relatively the same for both. I shouldn't fire one and only laugh at the other when they make a mistake. You want to have a process in place and you want to be able to adhere to it. So all of the managers need to be aware of it. Typically, you want to do your corrective action quickly because the longer you let something linger, the bigger the problem is going to become. That's it for management. We're going to do chapter 10 next. That is motivating employees.